take all the changes?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for accommodating them. So everyone's here, excited to hear from you today. We are at the Swan Center for Entrepreneurship at Carnegie Mellon, which is the prime center for where businesses start across the CME community. So what we're going to do, I'm going to give a quick introduction on you, and then we'll leave it for a few words, and then go into the Q&A moderation. That works?
Great. Yeah, that was great.
And then, so we'll do that for 30 minutes and then open it up to the audience afterwards. They'll come up and ask you a question.
Okay, great.
All right, good morning everyone for yet another speaker series at Sabah. As you mentioned last time that, our mission is really to bring prolific speakers to Teppo. Well, we can't physically do it in Pittsburgh, to use all the technology that we have out here. And last week we actually condemned the cowardly terrorist attacks on the Jammu and Kashmir border in India. And we said that we want to bring in nation builders and people who are true patriots, not only for their country, but for the world. So today we are excited to host Parth Jindalia, who him and his family are true patriots in their own rights. Just to give you a short intro of how I met Parth. We grew up together playing table tennis when we were kids. And Parth beat me more often than not in those games. As of today, Parth is the rising star of the JSW Group. The JSW Group is a $13 billion conglomerate across the world with interests in steel, infrastructure, sports, venture funds, IT solutions, and you name it. Parth here is the MD of JSW Cement and JSW Sports. He's also an avid sports enthusiast. He's a co-owner of the Delhi Daredevils or Delhi Capitals, which is the Indian Premier League cricket team. He's also the CEO of Bengaluru FC, which is a soccer team in India, and the Haryana Steelers, that is a kabaddi team in India. So today he's been very gracious to spend some time with us and to get to know about JSW himself and his journey. So Parth, welcome. And if you want any opening remarks to the students of CMU, we also have folks from our faculty and administration here, so they're very excited to have you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. Like Asha said, I've known Asha all my life, and it's been really great that he invited me over here today. Just give you a little brief background. Or personal background. I studied till the age of 16 in India and Dubai at the Cathedral School. Then I did my boarding school in England at Sevenoaks in England. From there I did my undergrad at Brown University. I did an economics and political science double major at Brown. And very recently I finished my MBA at Harvard Business School, class of 2016. So quite a recent graduate as well. In terms of, Asha obviously described the group. Just like to give a little bit more light to the group. Our largest business is steel business. We are India's largest producers of steel. We produce close to 18 million tons of steel in India and close to 3 million tons of steel in the United States. We have a facility just outside of Pittsburgh, in fact, at a facility called Mingo Junction. And we have a facility in Texas, in Big Town. We also have coal mines in West Virginia. Apart from steel, which is our flagship business, we produce about 5,500 megawatts of electricity, both through the thermal route as well as through the hydro and solar route. So we are the third largest producers of electricity in India. The other business we have is we own and operate ports in and around India and the Middle East. We handle close to 200 million tons of cargo in and around India, and we bring in various raw materials and ship out various exports to the world from our ports. Apart from that, like Asha mentioned, I handle our cement business. We are about a 12.5 million ton cement company, growing quite rapidly. And the idea behind our cement business is to use all the waste products that come out of the steel making operations as well as the power generating business and convert it into eco-friendly cement that goes into infrastructure projects. And then the last business vertical, which is a new launch that we are just launching in April, is getting into the manufacturing of paint. And the idea is that you need steel to make a home, you need cement to make a home, and you need to paint the home. So when you are a consumer, you should look and you should think of JSW as a one-stop solution to your housing requirements. And that's that's a new business venture that I've launched, and we're launching in April of this year. And obviously, one of the most my passion and my deep love is sport, and we're doing a lot to promote sports in India. We've launched India's first high performance Olympic training institute, known as the Inspire Institute of Sport. As a country and as Indians, many of you in the room I can see have roots in India or are from India. It always baffles all of us as to why a country of 1.2 billion people wins such few Olympic medals. And we won only 2 medals in Rio. Before that, 6 medals at London, 3 medals in Beijing, 1 medal in Athens. So, and as a country, we always blame the government, and we always say that the government doesn't do enough for the athletes. The government doesn't do enough to support sports, non-cricketing sports in India. So as a corporate and as a responsible citizen of the country, we said that instead of blaming the government, why don't we as JSW do something to change the environment and to promote non-Olympic sports. So I studied the model of the United States, studied the model of all the great Olympic nations in the world, including Australia, China, Japan, and realized that in India we start a bit too late. The government starts supporting athletes who made a mark at the Commonwealth Games or at the Asian Games, and by that time it's already a bit too late for the athlete to become an Olympic medalist. We've started at the grassroots level. We have about 300 athletes training at our facility. The youngest athlete is about 8 years old, and our average athlete is about 15 years old in age. Apart from our junior program, we also support elite athletes. And at the 2016 Rio Olympics, we had 12 our athletes from our program represent India, and one of them, namely Sakshi Malik, was one of 2 Indian medalists at the Olympic Games. And we have taken a target of 5 medals for India at the Tokyo Olympics. And as a person, as an individual, I went to my father and the board of JSW with the idea that I wanted to promote Olympic sports. They asked me the question as to what relevance or what connection that I have to JSW. And I said that, we as JSW, we are truly trying to build a modern India in steel, cement, in we're trying to contribute to the development of the country, but nothing really binds the country or builds the moral fiber of the country like sports does. And that's what I pitched it as a brand building initiative, as a way to get JSW known in India and around the world. And that's how the funds got allocated to me and to the sports program. So that's on the philanthropic side of sports, but on the commercial side of sports, we own 3 teams. We own a team in the Indian Super League, which is India's premier soccer tournament. We have a team from Bangalore, Bengaluru FC, which currently is number 1 on the table, and we're very excited about playoffs coming up. We also own a team in the Kabaddi League. Kabaddi is an indigenous Indian sport, and it's the fastest growing sport amongst rural India. And we own the Haryana team, which is very popular. Kabaddi is a very popular sport in Haryana. This is bordering Punjab, Rajasthan state. And then obviously we just very recently bought the Delhi team in the India's Premier Cricket, the Indian Premier League, and renamed the team the Delhi Capitals. And the vision behind the sports portfolio is, I truly believe that the only reason cable television is going to exist going forward is for live sports and for live news, and everything else is moving to your online, Netflix, Amazon Prime, GeoTV, etc. So I believe that by 2025, JSW Sports will truly be a very global business, but we will have presence in the three biggest sports in the country: cricket, kabaddi, and football. So that's the vision behind JSW Sports. And then, obviously, to tie all of this together, we have the JSW Foundation, which is our philanthropic arm, where we do a lot of social service. We spend percent of our profit after tax on ensuring that the community in and around all our facilities are truly uplifted. So we begin a holistic development of the community around us, because without the happy community, we cannot be islands of prosperity. So that's the reason why the foundation, which is headed by my mother, is we spend close to $20 to $25 million a year on social development. And then one of the main initiatives of the foundation is to eradicate malnutrition from certain pockets of Maharashtra and Karnataka, and that's a real project I have taken on myself, because that's my way of giving back, on the social in the social realm. I obviously grew up in this family, and I had the opportunity at a very young age to take on big responsibility, and I had the choice of really going to one of listed, and we have two publicly listed companies, JSW Steel and JSW Energy. But I chose to look after the smaller businesses which were at the time loss making. So that's why I took over JSW Cement and took over JSW Sports, and now those are growing, and I'm very excited, planning on doing my first IPO of JSW Cement in 2021, and then go from there. So happy to take any questions, and love to engage with you guys further.
Awesome. So that's clearly a very extensive resume, Parth, and you're a very busy guy. So thanks again for taking the time out. We'll go into a Q&A session now, and then we'll open it to the audience. So you mentioned your journey of being away from India for 10 years. When you were in the 11th grade, you went to Seven Oaks in England, then went to Brown, to HBS. So what was the transition like coming back into a family business after being away for 10 years? What were the challenges that you faced? And your father, Sajjan Jindal, what was the transition challenge that he posed to you? And what was the biggest learnings that you had through that journey, from school to your business?
Yeah, so I think it was a very big change. So between Brown and Harvard, I spent about 2 years outside of India. I worked for a year at a hedge fund in New York. I worked for Falcon Edge Capital for a year, and then I moved to Tokyo, where I worked for JFE Steel, which is Japan's second largest steel company, and they also own a 15% stake in JSW Steel. I basically went there to learn about steel, about the steel industry, about how a mature economy, how a company in a mature economy functions, and obviously I got to learn a great deal. When I came back to India, a few things really hit me. First, I was moving back from Japan and to India, which was a huge culture shock, because in Japan everything happens on time, and in India nothing happens on time. That was a very big change. But I realized that the biggest opportunity or the biggest challenge in India was how unorganized things are in India, and how the shift from unorganized to organized is happening, and it's happening rapidly. And that's where I saw as the challenge, and that's where I thought as the opportunity as well. Because if you can put a structure to the way you do your work, and if you can put together the right team and inculcate the right culture into your team, and be an organized player in a relatively unorganized market, you have the right to win in the market. And you know that's what has really helped me. I obviously saw that in my father and in the way he was conducting things and the way he was growing amidst a great deal of uncertainty. And you know I tried to imbibe the learnings that I took in Japan, also obviously all the learnings that I had in the United States,
Right.
and you know the differences are obviously there, but there are a lot of similarities as well in culture. And I felt that to be organized would really go a long way, and things are rapidly changing. And over the last, I would say, 3 years, you know, since I moved back in 2016, you know, the work environment, and you know, even the regulatory environment
Right.
is changing for the better. Yeah, so I would say being organized in an unorganized market was one of the key takeaways.
Right, right. That's great. I mean, so just on that, in terms of your transition, I saw one of your interviews where you mentioned that your dad challenges you on a daily basis, and it sets like lofty goals for you. One of you, as you know, Parth is the MD of JSW Cement, and that's a growing entity. So how do you compare to your competitors? I know your dad has set a target for you to beat the Asian Paints of the world and the Ambuja Cements. Given that JSW Steel beat Tata Steel as well at some point. So,
Yeah.
what are the challenges that he set for you?
You're sounding like my dad now.
So, so what are the challenges that he's posed to you, and what's your vision for JSW Cement as you move forward? I know you said you want an IPO by 21, so would love to hear more on that.
Yeah, you know, just to give some context, when my father started JSW Steel, we were a very relatively small steel company. In the year 2000, when the Janagar steel plant actually started, Tata Steel was at the time about 2 million tons, and we were setting up a 0.6 million ton capacity. And obviously in India, everything you eat or you watch or you drink or you drive in is all Tata, right? From your cars to your salt to your tea to your TV to everything, it's Tata. So taking on the Tata group was, you know, extremely big for him. And, you know, it's a really proud thing that in about 17 years' time, JSW Steel was able to leapfrog Tata Steel and become the largest steel company in India. So, you know, he believes that impossible truly means nothing, and that can surmount any task. So when I started looking after JSW Cement, it was a loss-making business, and we were at the time, you know, very small cement company. Just to give you context, the largest cement company in India today, the fifth largest cement company in the world, which is UltraTech Cement, it's about 120 million tons of capacity. We are only 12 million tons of capacity. So we are 1/10 the size of the largest cement company. My goal is to, you know, right now we are the 9th largest cement company in India. My goal is that over the next 2 years, I want to become a 20 million ton cement company and become the 5th largest cement company by then. And then go in for an IPO and use the proceeds of that IPO to very quickly ramp up 30 million tons. And then look for inorganic opportunities to quickly acquire assets and quickly scale up to 50 million tons.
Right.
It's still a very tall order to catch up with UltraTech, but you know, I think looking at it's very important. Yes, you set yourself ambitious targets and goals,
Right.
but you look at the practical realities of your own balance sheet. You look at what's possible and what's not possible, and you grow as your own company is growing. So the industry is growing. The industry is growing at about 15% a year. Last year we grew at 54%. This year we're on track to grow at around 45%. So as long as I'm out beating the industry, you know, by a long margin, that's what I'm looking at. It's good that my partner's not in the room right now because he but it's very important to be realistic in goals, and I've set out what I think is a very ambitious target for my company, and we'll grow from strength to strength with time. And once we have the ammunition of an IPO and the proceeds from that, then then we can really look at expanding at a much faster pace.
Absolutely. That's great. I mean, so on the note of expansion, I mean, you're taking care of JSW Cement, but recently, as we mentioned before some of you walked in the room, that you also led a $1.2 billion steel investment in JSW Steel USA, one of the steel plants being just an hour away from here, and one in Houston. So what is your vision for JSW Steel USA in terms of, like, we have students here from Carnegie Mellon, everyone's looking at US-India partnerships. So what was the vision there? What are your goals there? And what challenges and partnerships do you foresee to expand that project?
No, so I think as a steel company, I think we've spent close to 20 years in India, and we think that as an organization we were at an inflection point where we believe that we have deep technical expertise, and we think that we can bring that to facilities overseas as well. So in our quest of becoming a truly global organization and a global conglomerate, we saw a big opportunity in the US. The US has two things which we believe is a unique advantage over other countries. One, it has a very low cost of natural gas.
Yep.
The second, it is one of the largest markets for scrap, because it's the largest car market in the world now. So due to high availability of scrap, low cost of natural gas, and a very strong domestic economy, which now, ever since Donald Trump become president, has become a lot more protected. We felt there was a big opportunity to enter the US market, bring in the technical know-how that we have from India, leverage the low cost of natural gas and scrap available in the US, and grow that business. So when we acquired a very distressed asset at Mickey Junction for a fifth of replacement cost in terms of value, and modernizing that facility as we speak, and we're very confident that that would return.
Right.
That's the business side. On the strategy side, Silicon, which is the largest steel company in the world, they are strategically entering the Indian market. So we needed a counterbalance to their main market, which is America. Because in the event that they come in and try and gain market share in India by lowering prices, we need to have a counter strategy by lowering prices in their main market in order to gain market share. So that's the strategic angle. But our goals in the US, it's a beginning, and if all goes well, we're looking to become a 10% market share in the US by 2021.
That's great. And Carnegie Mellon obviously has a lot of resources on the technical angles. I believe there might be some professors assisting with the US plant as well. So do you see any collaborations with the school or in the area in terms of universities, because a lot of talent comes from here going forward, or is that a longer term goal?
No, I would actually really like to organize visits if it's of interest to Carnegie Mellon, and also we would love to recruit from CMU. Not from the business school, but also the engineering school.
Yep.
I have a very big requirement of people there, and right now we are 300 people strong at MICO, and very shortly that number will scale up as large as 1,000. So, it's requirement of the obviously Carnegie Mellon being number one university in the. I think there's a huge amount of collaboration that can be.
Great. And on that note, there was one report that your dad mentioned that you were trying to get into electric vehicles. Is that an immediate project? Is that a long-term project? I'm asking because autonomous vehicles here at Carnegie Mellon, like Uber's pioneered their self-driving cars here. Electric vehicles are definitely, and the Robotics Institute, a daily topic of progress. So do you see another works coming in with electric vehicles as of now?
Yeah, so we're very seriously evaluating getting into the electric vehicle business. We think that electric vehicles is the future. We think that there's no doubt that. We think that the incumbents in the Indian auto space are resisting the move to electric or are delaying the move to electric as much as possible and get as much out of their current investments as they can. And that's why we think that there's a space available for JSW to enter the EV space. And currently we're in talks with GM to buy out their facilities in India. The talks are at very advanced stage at the moment, and we hope to have some good news. We've also been building our global team at the moment, and the ex-head of General Motors Korea, Brazilian gentleman, is now heading the entire EV vertical. But absolutely, I think our target is to launch our first electric vehicle model by 2022.
That's great.
That's the goal, and JSW Energy is the company that would be making the investment. We've already announced a $1 billion investment into the space,
Okay.
and we're hoping to make progress very shortly.
That's amazing.
But we would welcome any chance of collaboration on that front as well.
Absolutely. I mean, so that's great to hear. You know, one of our goals is to bring collaboration across from different countries here. So it's great to hear that, you know, at least it's in the radar for JSW. I want to make a short pivot into what you mentioned was your biggest passion, which was sports. You know, we mentioned that you own Bengaluru FC, you're the CEO, Haryana Steelers. So, can you talk about where your passion for sport? I mean, I know you as a very competitive guy. I remember those games. So, can you talk about where that passion for sport came in, and talk about Indian sports in general, because it's a very cricket-dominated country even today. But I know that one of your endeavors is to move away from cricket, not away from cricket, but add to it and to more sports. Bengaluru FC just topped the league in ISL yesterday. That was great. So yeah, I just wanted to hear more about how your sporting vision came through and what your vision you have for Indian sports.
You know, I think growing up, whenever I used to go with my family to any of our factories, sports was one way of connecting and engaging with everyone who worked at the factory. And one of the beauties of sport is that it's such a great level. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter your past, your color, your creed, nothing matters. It's just sport and just how good you are and what your skills are. So I think from a very early age, playing sports with not only my family but also with all the people at the factories and at the units was where passion and love for sports came. Also, whenever I would go to a new boarding school or go to college, I would just end up at the sports field and make friends, and I think that's the way for me to make with everybody again, and that's how I broke the ice with people. So I think that's truly what my love for sport came. My uncle, my father were all very sporty, so sport is integrated. Whether watching Indian cricket, whether watching hockey, field hockey, whether watching anything to do with India, always a great deal of patriotism and you know nationalism in sports from a very young age. But like I said, you know, one of the things that always bothered me and troubled me the most was watching India at the Olympics. And
Yep.
I remember when I was in England during the Beijing Games, when India won its first gold medal in an individual event since 1904. Been absolutely immense, and my English friends started making a great amount of fun of me, being like, how can a country of 1.2 billion people win only 3 medals? And this was exactly maybe 4 weeks after India beat England in the T20 cricket.
Right.
I was poking fun at them, so they gave it back. and in a big way. So I always wanted to do something for sports. I really didn't know how. And in 2012, when I was looking at a hedge fund, I had the opportunity to have lunch with Mahesh Bhupathi. Uh, Mahesh Bhupathi is a 12-time Grand Slam champion doubles in tennis. And I asked Mahesh, I said, Mahesh, in 2004 at the Athens game, I stayed awake 4 a.m. to you and Leander lose in the bronze medal match. Every time in the Olympics, you and Leander would be in the news. That you're going to win a medal. You and Sania Mirza would be in the news. That you're going to win a medal. And you never won a medal. And why does India never win medals at the Olympics? And then he explained to me that India lacks infrastructure, India lacks coaching, India lacks know-how in sports science and nutrition, and India lacks an ecosystem of development of sports. Like you guys, NCAA is such a phenomenal way of producing talent. And in India, we have nothing like that. So he told me that as a group and as a corporate, why don't you guys do your bit? And he said India needs a high performance Olympic training center like the likes of Colorado Springs in the US. And I actually visited all these facilities. I visited the Aspire Institute of Sport in Doha, the Australian Institute of Sport in Melbourne, the USOC, Colorado Springs. And then we went about building our own facility, and we did that. And the beauty of India is there is no dearth of talent in this country. Talent is coming out of everywhere. It's the right nurturing that is required. And everything that I'm saying for Olympic sports is also applicable for football, soccer. And we felt that owning a team, nurturing players through our youth academy setup, having them represent our team, Bengaluru FC, and then having them get selected for the national team would be the best way we could contribute to Indian football. And it's I feel very proud when we started Bengaluru FC, the country was ranked 173rd in the world in the FIFA rankings. And today we're 96th in the world. We just beat Thailand 4-1 in the Asia Cup, which was our first time ever that we beat Thailand since 1964. And 11 out of the 18 players in the team are from Bengaluru FC. So that's what we want to do, and that's how we want to contribute to sport. So we're looking at a holistic sort of an ecosystem where so at IIS, which is our Olympic Institute, all the head coaches are foreign coaches. So we've selected 5 Olympic disciplines: boxing, wrestling, judo, track and swimming. And there are a lot of reasons as to why we selected those sports, which I don't want to get into. But all the heads are foreigners at the moment, and all the assistant coaches are Indians. And the idea is that by 2024, we will be able to promote the Indian assistant coaches to the head coach role and stop the reliance on foreign coaches for sport and for Olympic sports. Because we need that not only the athlete, but we need to develop the coaches, we need to develop the physiotherapists, we need to develop the sports nutritionists, the scientists, the exercise physiologists. It's an entire ecosystem. And when I was at Brown or when I was at Harvard, the kind of facilities that we enjoyed or what you guys enjoyed, Carnegie Mellon, not even most Indian athletes get to enjoy those kind of facilities. And what we are trying to create, and that's what we tried to create at IIS. And the results are coming. We've just very recently, one of our athletes won a silver medal at the Youth Olympic Games in Buenos Aires in judo. One of our sprinters won a bronze medal at the Youth Olympic Games in 10 meter hurdles. So the results are coming, and we're very hopeful that India can win 5 medals. Form a program at Tokyo, and then then go from there, and it should all culminate in India hosting the Summer Olympic Games in 2032 or 2036.
Yeah, and that's great to hear because I know as a child we both were Arsenal fans, and
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing that my dad told me, that your dad told me, that what attachment do you have to any other team of another country when you have the local teams that you can support. So that's great that you're supporting the local sports and local clubs. So apart in the last
Like just
yeah, sure.
just to give you context, like when we started Bengaluru FC and when I went for the first game, after the game the players were having samosas and pizza for their after game snack, right? Like no wonder they're not going to succeed, and we changed the entire way in which sports science and nutrition was looked at, and the results were quite instant. It took in our first season we won the league, and there's a very famous headline that came when we won the league because it was a group of rejects with India's highest football. No, because by the time we started the league, all the other teams had already formed themselves, and we were left to pick up all the rejects. And that group of rejects, just because of a focus in sports science and nutrition and the right coaching, went on to the tournament, went on to win the Indian League. But from 2012 to now, in the last 7 years, we can see a key change in the way Indian sports is being approached, not only by private organizations like JSW, but also by the government. So I have no doubt that the results will start to come now.
That's fantastic. I mean, so as I said, like this is, in terms of truly building a country, I believe that India as a country hasn't gone through something so disparate for everyone to come together and focus on one goal. I definitely think sports is there, which I think you and JSW are doing a fantastic job. So I have a list of audience questions, but before that, I'm going to open it up to everyone. They're going to come up and ask you a question, and after that, I can read some audience questions in the last 15 minutes that we have. Does that work?
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, open it up for questions. Come on in.
Hi, Fawad. I'm Anna, second year MBA, Asha's friend and classmate. Thank you for your time, and I mean, he said you're really, really busy. My question is around something that you touched on before. So we're talking about how organized and unorganized businesses are in India. I am myself associated with two of the manufacturing industries in India, like one being textiles and the other being chemicals and plastics. What were your few key points when you came back to India and wanted to take this business to next level? And what are the few challenges that you are dealing with or dealt with at that time as you move forward?
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges was creating a differentiation for the products that was specific to the end customer versus the competition, maintaining a very high degree of quality, so that we can put trust on our consuming segment. So I think everyone faces margins and everyone chases profitability, but I think it's very important to take the initial few years to establish your product and your brand in the market. Yep. With that you have long-term returns. So maybe short-term you need to sacrifice returns for long-term gains, right? So I think that was one of the key steps that I took. The second thing in terms of challenges, I think one of the biggest challenges was finding the right talent.
Yep.
I think talent is really obviously very, very important and extremely valuable. And I see the thought that if promoters in India, entrepreneurs in India take a lot of onus on themselves and don't like to delegate much. And I think finding the right people, delegating responsibility, and focusing on developing systems and processes is very, very important. And I think that's what really helped me. I think, people have a trust problem sometimes in trusting others. I think if you focus on having the right people and building the right processes and delegating, then the systems and processes should take over from the managers. And I think that's something which I try to do and still trying to do. Nowhere near where I need to be or where the companies need to be, but we're at least working towards it.
Right. I think that's a very interesting point because if you hear any industrialist or businessman talk, they talk about SOPs. I know Mukesh Ambani talks about the same thing when he came back from Stanford, but it was all about inculcating those SOPs. So I think that's a big learning that we can take out of this like business school as well. Anyone have another question? Yeah. Ayush.
Hi, Parth. So you mentioned how you recently graduated from HBS, right? And you learned all the best businesses practices. How do these practices compare to what your father and the leaders that you interact with follow in India, and how do you see them adapt to local practices in India?
Sure, that's a very good question. I think there's a lot of practical knowledge that obviously experience brings, and there's a lot of textbook or case study knowledge that take out of business. But it's really interesting the case methodology or even just business school in general. I can't really pinpoint where exactly business school has been helpful, but at the same time, it comes in so many different ways. It just has helped me overall in understanding business in a much better way. And I think obviously the benefit of the benefit I got out of learning at business school is that I got to see how successful organizations have evolved through time. Also seen how successful organizations at a particular time have gone to fail.
Right.
Like the Kodak study was something I'll never forget. The Nucor study, Nucor versus US Steel's case at HBS was something that I'll never forget. I think those things, so it keeps that canteen up, right? Like when I see a business going in a particular way, I relate it to a particular business that I studied about in business school. So like one of the first things I did when I came back to India was I shut down our IT business. I felt like our IT business was outside our core competence, and it was something that we would do. Just say that we would in IT, and I felt that it was not really a value accretive business. I thought that companies like IBM and SAP and others do a much better job at handling the IT requirements of the group. And one of the things that I thought about was the GE case study when I was thinking of this and how GE diversified for no rhyme or reason to several business verticals, and now has been cutting back on several of its business verticals which are outside its competence. So I think it's very, very important. And I think that those are the kind of learnings that I take back. Obviously, when I sit with the seniors or when I sit with the leadership team at the group, they bring in a lot of local knowledge about India. And I feel like I bring in more knowledge about the US than they bring in. That's the trade-off I see. It's interesting.
So it's good to know that business school case studies actually help because we've done a lot of them already.
No, it helps. It helps in a subconscious type of a way.
Right.
Like it's not like you're gonna refer to. It's not like how it used to be in college where you pick up a chapter and you refer to that chapter.
Right.
But at the same time, you'll think back and you'll be like, oh, this is similar to that case that we all debated in school. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I've got back any of those pieces. So,
Right. So So you think your time at HBS and investing that time in business school was definitely worthwhile in terms of the vision that you brought to your businesses?
I think so. I think it, obviously it's given me a great amount of exposure. It's opened my eyes into what's going on in the world and how business leaders, big and small, think about doing their businesses. I also, JSW Paints was an independent project that I took up with one of the professors at business school, and we started the semester with the problem statement as to what is the next business the JSW Group should enter. And we ended up with paint, and he helped me hire the CEO of the business, and $150 million later, we're launching in April. So it's so I think that just for that it was useful, and then obviously the people you meet, the professors you interact with, and the peers, like all the time when I'm stuck making a decision, I call up some of my friends and just try and summarize the issue and get their perspective. So some of my closest friends are from business school, so I think in terms of that it was truly useful.
That's great. Awesome. We have more questions. Go ahead.
So I've just got a question. You were talking about growing the cement business, and you said your company was 9th at the moment. How are you kind of looking to grow? Are you looking towards like organic growth, or are you looking towards like maybe merging with some other cement companies and growing that way?
Sure, thanks. So at the moment, we are looking at growing organically because, like I mentioned, we convert the waste products that come out of steel and power business and get into cement. And as the steel business continues to grow, they continue to produce more waste. So that becomes an automatic way for us to expand our business. So at the moment we're quite focused on going organic. And then when we do our IPO, we'll raise funds, and my target is to raise close to $500 million through the IPO process. And with those funds, we would look at growing inorganically by growing through the acquisition route. So I've just set out a strategy right now to go to 20 million tons and organic, and then from there we would look at both organic as well as inorganic route. But over the last 2 years, we've been strategically acquiring limestone blocks around India through the auction route. So that gives us an opportunity to do organically as well, if the valuations don't make sense for an inorganic acquisition at that. Because whenever you look at buying something, the valuations are very, very high, right? So it's always buy versus build is always the question that you need to ask yourself. And given that I'm just starting out in my career, I don't think that we rush in going fast.
Got it. Thanks, man. Paul, you had a question, and then Sonika.
I'm Paul Shoemate, first year MBA. This is kind of a personal question, but you wear a lot of hats. You're managing director, you're involved with sports, whatever else. Could you speak to, I guess, your day-to-day or week-to-week time management and how you kind of make sure that you maintain your efficiency and effectiveness as a leader without getting yourself spread too thin and kind of getting distracted by the less important parts of your commitments?
No, that's a great question. I to be very honest, I do struggle with that quite a bit. But I would say that I have a very structured review mechanism. So every week I spend half a day on sports. So that's normally my Friday evenings, which I look to the most. So that's how I end the week. I spend about I would say about 80% of my time between cement and paint, which are the two operating businesses that I look after. And then I would say, on a day-to-day, if I were to just describe a normal day, wake up in the morning, obviously have all the US emails accumulated in the inbox because that's what US is operating. So spend about an hour answering those questions, and just following what's going on there. Spend a couple of hours going to the gym and just hanging out with the family, and then get to work. First thing would be reviewing the daily production in cement, the daily sales that's going on in the cement business, any issues that are there in order to resolve that. In the afternoon, post lunch, should probably spend time evaluating the paint projects on how they're going, what the progress is, anything that needs to be done on that. But a couple of hours a day I spend on HR because I think that's predominantly the most important thing that is going on in terms of manpower planning, hiring, recruiting, stuff like that. That's a typical day. And then we work on Saturdays, and Saturdays is dedicated just to strategy, just to evaluate businesses, opportunities, issues, future planning, business planning, monthly planning, quarterly planning, how we are going against the plan, what kind of things do we need to do. Then like I said, the phone is always open, it's always available. But the way my philosophy is, I've hired CEOs of each business. So the cement business has its own CEO, paint business has its own CEO, sports has its own CEO, and I'm kind of them, and they run the day to day, and I chip in as in and where I think that I can add value. So tomorrow there is a possibility that JSW Steel might need me in a bigger capacity. So if they do, the businesses that I look after should not suffer in any way. And that's why a lot of my time is going on building the right team so that they can take over. Whether or not I'm in the business or not, it shouldn't make a difference to the business. That's the mission of it, and it's some of the businesses are there, like cement. I don't think it's going to make a material impact if I'm there or not there, and that's a great thing for me. 2 years ago, it would have made a huge impact, but today I think it's a good place, and I'm happy about that. I can't say the same about paints or sports at the moment, but hopefully in a year's time, they'll be in a good position as well. So as an owner or as the entrepreneur, that's the best position to be in. Yes, you might be able to add a couple of percentage points into the growth of bottom line, but at the same time, businesses need to be self-sustainable, and the family is involved. But if you look at any of the best businesses in the world, some of the family members are not even involved in the business. So that's the true vision, and that's what JSW needs to get to. So what I'm trying to do in whatever way I can.
That's great. Bharat. So we have time for one more question, and then for closing remarks. So Sonika.
Hi, thank you for your time. Coming from a family business myself and looking at the news that has been happening, I wanted to understand how do you see the impact of the new insolvency and bankruptcy code affecting JSW and the overall banking and infrastructure in India, as well as how do you see the foreign market investments in India as an impact of that? Thank you.
I think there was a concept of unlimited liability in India. and the concept was every owner is a robber. Every promoter is a thief. That was always the mindset with which, unfortunately, the bureaucrats viewed business and entrepreneurs in India, and even the banking sector. If you look at what's happened to Vijay Mallya or what's happened to, I would say Vijay Mallya is the best example. Yes, I agree. He was very, very flamboyant, and he lived beyond even his lofty needs. But at the end of the day, what did he do? He defaulted on payments due to serious crisis in his airlines business, and because of that, all sorts of things got written about him and about his family and about his personality, etc. The concept of limited liability did not exist in India, and I think the new insolvency and bankruptcy code it's a limited liability on every owner. Any business, however good it is, can go bankrupt, right? Look at Donald Trump; he's gone bankrupt so many times and come back out of it, right? So the point is that in India that didn't exist, and today it does. And every promoter is ring fenced, saying that yes, you will lose your business, but you will not lose your house or your cars or your livelihood because of the business. It's a very progressive step that has been taken by the government, and I think that it also gives a solution to the banking sector, because non-performing assets were really piling up in the country, and due to this law, a lot of performing assets are going into the hands of people who can turn them around. So we have acquired two major steel assets through the IBC process, obviously we got it at a haircut, we got it at a major haircut, but now at least the banks be able to realize some upside on these assets, because if we are able to turn them around, it will be a very good thing. In terms of the foreign investment, I think what foreign investors are looking at are looking for is transparency, and they're looking for very clear rule of law. Even for a company, they want a great deal on the concept of an unlimited liability. Now that there is limited liability, I see different firms looking at it much more seriously, because they know that even if their businesses go under, it would still it's still possible for them to walk away from the country, which earlier the Indian courts could attach their foreign assets, etc. So it's made it a lot more conducive environment for foreign investment, and I do see an uptick in foreign investment to not only the IBC code but also the goods and services.
Got it. So Parth, I know we want to be cognizant of your time, but holistically this was a fantastic discussion, right? We went over high-level thinking. What I personally got out of it is impossible is truly nothing. As Paul mentioned, you wear different hats. You have lofty goals and challenges, but it's really, I think everyone can take it on themselves to set their goals and vision according to the impossible is nothing mantra, really. So, any final words before we cut? As I said, we would love to have you here physically when you visit your plants in Bingo. So, any closing statements before we end?
No, it's great. Thanks for having me, and it's been really great chatting with all of you. I think all I can end with is everyone must dream big, and you must always reach to the start. Even if you reach the clouds, it's good enough, right? So I think no dream is too big or too small, and I'd say gain as much experience as you can from the people around you and from your professors. Follow them as much as you can, and their office hours, etc. Because kind of knowledge that they have and the kind of insights that they can provide, time doesn't come back. And I truly look back at my time at business school and I miss it, and I wish I utilized my professor's office hours a little bit more. Keep as many relationships as you can, because you never know when one of your business friend colleagues is going to be useful in life, in business, or personally. So that I would say, and happy to if any of you all ever are interested in going to any of the steel plants in the US or in India, or visiting JSW, happy to facilitate that, and would love to stay in touch.
Awesome. So let's give Parth a round of applause. It's not too late to have fun on a Friday today, so it's closer than it comes. Thanks again, Jay. Appreciate it. Have a good day. Thanks.
Bye.
Alright, thank you everyone. Food is here, chula's here, enjoy it. And thanks for coming. This is our final speaker event as the old summer board. It's all to them now.